Yes! Hello, my beautiful friends. What an amazing day it is, and welcome back. Happy Wednesday. I hope your week is unfolding oh so beautifully well because it's all downhill from here, hopefully. We got some serious business to attend to today. A very interesting Supreme Court ruling that we're going to jump in on. We got some election fraud documents. Chuck Grassley sending letters back and forth with the FBI demanding access to some more records. And so we'll go through that. We also got to talk about this Tucker-Ted Cruz battle that's a brewing out there. That full interview was released between those two. We saw a little bit of that this morning on the members only stream, but full interview's out. We watched it. And the president also commented on it today. So we'll see what Trump said about it and more. It is a beautiful day, my friends. Hopefully we're coming in loud and clear. Great to see everybody. Looks like the tubes are connected. We love when that happens. And so a quick preview on what we're talking about, then we'll just get right to it. I already gave us a little bit of an outline here, but we're going to hear from one of Tucker's affiliates, his CEO actually, and see what he said about all of the allegations against Tucker, because some people have been saying that Tucker is influenced by Qatar. Laura Loomer in particular has made that claim, and Jack Posobiec has responded, sharing a post from the actual company who is listed in the documents that Laura Loomer shared with us. So we'll go through that. Then we'll turn our attention to this major Supreme Court decision that came out that is causing a bunch of people on the left to just go nuts. Honestly, Andy No talked about this and said that they were over there on Blue Sky talking about eliminating Supreme Court justices because they're so angry about this, because the trans, some of the T's over there are just, upset. So, and sometimes they're, acting out. So we'll talk about it. Then we'll go through this FBI story because the FBI did ask agencies to destroy intel on the China plot to rig the 2020 elections. And we saw this report back from 2020 where they found over 19,000 fraudulent IDs, and then the FBI just buried the whole thing. Remember, all these IDs were coming in. This dude from Michigan, pretty important state. Yeah, with some of the most corrupt people there, like Jocelyn Benson and Dana Nessel and Big Gretch Rona. So we'll go through this. Chuck Grassley sent a letter in to Kash Patel. We got our hands on it. We'll see what Grassley said to Kash. And another letter came out from Grassley that was sent earlier this month that we have now received that shows the FBI was basically doing the same thing to attack the Catholics out there. And of course, any radical extremist groups that were not in total alignment with the administration. So we'll go through that. I got some clips from the Biden autopen scandal that was happening today, and we'll get into all of it. And so it's going to be a beautiful stream, my friends. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for subscribing if you haven't already done that. And thanks for considering becoming a member if you're looking to hang out with us in the mornings. We do a stream in the morning almost 6 days a week, every week. Some weeks we have to take off, like last week we were traveling for Father's Day, stuff like that. But we really deliver for our membos. We have extra streams, we do after parties, and really the main benefit is we have an amazing community. And since it's this little smaller stream, we have a little bit of time to connect, and it's a lot of fun. So come join us. You can join up on YouTube, click the members only, join as a membo, or join us at watchingthewatchers.locals.com if you're not interested in signing up on YouTube. If you want to go over to Locals, a little more features over on Locals because you can add posts and other people can post and stuff like that. Or you can join up on YouTube. Either way, we appreciate you. All right, so, and now, my friends, let's get to business on the day because we got some stories that are percolating out there, starting with this one over from the battle. Tucker Carlson versus Ted Cruz. We saw the full interview between the two, and it was quite explosive. For some people, very uncomfortable. I listened to the full thing. I enjoyed every minute of it. I think that it's very important that we have a conversation about these issues, and we got to hear from both sides of the aisle on it. We got to see one side on this in our party and the opposite, essentially, and got to see those two go head to head, and I thought it was very instructive. And I didn't hear anything in there that was against Tucker to be anti-Semitic and hates Jews or anything. And I didn't hear anything from Ted Cruz that he's an Israel shill and he doesn't think critically about these things and he's totally illegitimate in his contentions. And so I thought it was a beautiful conversation. Hopefully we are able to glean and learn something from it and not get invested in other foreign wars where both parties are going in hand over fist, excited as hell for the next great battle. Because we've already gone through that a number of times here in my lifetime and yours, and we're all pretty tired of that. So some sobriety, some level-headed conversations are always appreciated. And if you haven't watched those clips or watched the interview, I would encourage you to check it out. Now, in response to Tucker Carlson asking some hard questions, we see that some people are saying Tucker Carlson is controlled by the Muslims. Ted Cruz is controlled by the Jews, and Carlson is controlled by the Muslims. All right. And I'm just a Catholic dude. I don't know what the hell's going on. But Neil Patel for Tucker Carlson, who is the CEO over there, is the co-founder and publisher of the Daily Caller and the CEO at Tucker Carlson Network. And he's responding without naming her. I think he's talking about Laura Loomer, because Laura Loomer posted this, has been hammering this. Mark Levin and some of the other people that Tucker Carlson has called out have been posting about this, saying, wait a minute, Tucker Carlson is paid off by Qatar. What's going on? And here's what Laura Loomer said. I got screenshots, she shared, of the FARA documents that were filled out that prove that Qatar paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for an interview between Tucker and the Prime Minister of Qatar, the same group that's funding Hamas about the war with Iran, right? So in other words, Tucker's kind of bought off, whatever. Now, this was a paid propaganda piece, she says, in which over $200,000 was paid by the embassy of the state of Qatar for Tucker to interview a Qatari official, all while knowing Hamas is a proxy that's being funded by Qatar, right? So it's like, whoa, Tucker is getting paid by the same terrorists that are funding Hamas? Whoa, it's a pretty strong allegation. Now, Qatar funds Islamic terror all over the world, she says, targeting American citizens. These are not good people. Tucker Carlson should be honest that he's a mouthpiece for genocidal Muslims. Tucker, one of the only dudes I've ever heard talk about Christianity out there who's, I would say, ex-mainstream media. We know Candace Owens and some people during the Members Only stream this morning mentioned, Brandon Tatum and a lot of other people talk about Christianity in the context of this conflict. But Tucker, interesting that that's the phrase from him, because I don't even really hear, guys like Ted Cruz or other Republicans talking about any Christian interest ever, almost in Ukraine or in Gaza or in the Middle East at all. It's just kind of, the two sides are the main focus. Anyways, now his media company was literally funded by a Muslim investor who's half Pakistani. And so we know that Tucker's team is going to be responding to this aggressively, not responding by name, but it's kind of a subtweet, sub-post over there. We know who they're talking about. And trust me when I say, a lot of people in the pro-Trump circles are very uncomfortable with this. They say Tucker's controlled by the Muslims and Cruz by the Jews. It's like a Dr. Seuss book. People need to wake up and stop pretending like this is a conspiracy theory. And then she cited this, which is the FARA document. Now, in the FARA document, right, this was actually written by another company called Lumen 8 that looks like this, right? So Lumen 8 advisors signed off on this one from Virginia and made a very simple FARA filing, right? Amended registrant, that's all we are. Here's the deal. Yes, Embassy of the State of Qatar. And the rumors were it was about $200,000 or so, which is not a lot of money considering who we're talking about, Tucker Carlson and the Prime Minister of Qatar, to facilitate that with security and to get a whole camera crew over there, all the things. Doesn't seem like a lot of money. Anyways, so there's some gifts there. Also, legal services, we got it. So Embassy of the State of Qatar in two items, 2024, 2025, right? So that's what Laura Loomer's posting and sharing, saying this shows Tucker is controlled by the Muslims. Then we turn around and Tucker Carlson's team via Neil Patel, he came out and said the following. Allegations that Tucker Carlson or Tucker Carlson network took money from any foreign country for an interview or for any other reason or categorically and definitively false and defamatory. Neither Tucker nor TCN has ever taken a penny from Qatar or any foreign country. To the contrary, TCN bought out all its investors last March to achieve total and absolute independence. Almost no other major media company can make that claim. Now, there are no more consequential debates than issues of war and peace. Thousands and even millions of lives could be at stake. Like his views or not, Tucker is an open book. He gives his opinions daily and openly, along with all the reasoning behind them. He's proven repeatedly that he's willing to debate anyone about those opinions. Those choosing to lie about him and question his motives instead of just debating him on the merits are just proving the weakness of their case. And Mays and others are asking, Owen Schroyer over from InfoWars, saying, are Tucker and TCN considering legal action against these things? Mays says, like Tucker or not, he's been saying the same thing about Iran for about a decade. Just watched an interview in 2018. He asked the exact same questions about Iran. So Tucker's been saying this for a long time. One can disagree with him, but he's not getting paid off by Qatar, from Mays, who's a very amazing follow. Maybe that's why his name is Mays, because he's an amazing follow. All right, so we got that. Now, that was what was posted over from Tucker's team. Jack Posobiec, also shout out. He, of course, posted this today. He said, here's a statement out from the consulting firm that set up the Qatar interview confirming Tucker's network did not get paid. Wrote this. Says, Luminate Advisors, here's our statement, files documents under FARA in accordance with the DOJ requirements and our legal obligations. And we find it ironic that those who follow the law get called into question. And Tucker Carlson, TCN, and its affiliates have never received payment from Lumen 8 Advisors at all, entities affiliated with it, or its client. Lumen 8 Advisors proudly works with the government of Qatar, and in this capacity provided interview preparation and advice to the Qatari government in relation to Tucker Carlson's interview with the Qatari Prime Minister. Following consultation with the FARA lawyers, Lumen 8 Advisors thought it's best to register the meeting as per regular practice. For those who know better, to twist this and pretend Tucker or TCN was paid anything for the interview is just loathsome. Ugh. Evidently, no good deed goes unpunished, and that's what we get for reporting it. So that's the battle that is a-brewing over there. President Trump got asked about this today in the Oval Office after he was celebrating the soccer team here. And here is what the president said about this red on red internal civil war.
Have you seen the Tucker Carlson Senator Ted Cruz interview? It seems like this issue on whether or not the United States should strike is kind of dividing a lot of your supporters.
No, my supporters are for me. My supporters are America first and make America great again. My supporters don't want to see Iran have a nuclear weapon. Tucker's a nice guy. He called and apologized the other day because he thought he said things that were a little bit too strong, and I appreciated that. And Ted Cruz is a nice guy. I mean, he's been with me for a long time. I'd say once the race was over, he's been with me ever since, right? But very simple. If they think that it's okay for Iran to have a nuclear weapon, then they should oppose me. But nobody thinks it's okay. People that don't want, I don't want to fight either. I'm not looking to fight. But if it's a choice between fighting and them having a nuclear weapon, you have to do what you have to do. Maybe we won't have to fight. Don't forget, we haven't been fighting. We add a certain amount of genius to everything, but we haven't been fighting.
So we'll see if that equation changes. But from Trump's perspective, right, it's just a defensive posture. Helping the Israelis is not fighting on their behalf. And that's the line as it stands right now. Meanwhile, Trump, as we know, he talks a lot. And we've seen how sometimes that actually works. Just says, you know what, we're just going to dump a bunch of tariffs on you in 30 days, 90 days. They go, ah! Everybody freaks out, calls, says, actually, we will help you with the border a little bit. And then suddenly that starts to unwind itself. So we know that he is a master negotiator. This is what he does. And while all this is happening, while everybody's taking knives out, slashing each other over this, calling each other anti-Semitic and isolationists and pro-Putin and all the things, pro-Israel, bought off by AIPAC, all the things. We have a nice, beautiful flag that has been hoisted, raised, and lifted out on the White House lawn, and so we can all pause and admire the glory. And I'm proud. Yeah! Just muting that because we're gonna get a strike on YouTube. All right, so I can't sing, obviously, but the flag is very beautiful, and we enjoy it there. Now, hopefully, the flag gets electrified or something anytime you try to put a different flag on there. You want to introduce some, other flag on there, just zaps you like a Tesla coil from Command & Conquer, Red Alert 2, one of the best games of all time. Anyway, so that is what's going on. Tucker versus Cruz continues on, and we'll continue to reap the benefits of this conversation as it continues. We'll keep our eye on this one. All right, so let's now turn our attention to some other very serious business on the day, which is a Supreme Court ruling. Major ruling from the Supreme Court. The trans not happy about it at all. They are mourning the loss in this case. United States versus the Attorney General and the reporter for Tennessee. The state of Tennessee passed some laws regarding transitions of minors, and the United States, in a prior generation, in a prior DOJ, came out, sued them, said, how dare you govern yourselves? We're the DOJ, and if we want to transition minors, we're going to do it. And they did it for about 4 years. So now the Supreme Court has come back down and issued a ruling, and it's a contentious one, 6-3. And let me just show you, this is from the head note, which we'll fast forward through and actually get into some more meat and potatoes on this, but it was contentious. And you can see here is the breakdown on how the judges ruled. So the Chief Justice, Roberts, is going to be delivering the opinion of the court, the main bulk of the decision. And you're going to see this thing where some judges are agreeing with part of Roberts, but not other parts, and coming to their own conclusions. And so the breakdown goes like this. Thomas, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett all joined. So they're in the majority and basically in total agreement with Roberts. Then Alito joined as to a couple parts. So he says, well, I like part 1 and I like 2B. The rest of it's crap, John. And then Clarence Thomas comes in and he says, actually, I'm just going to write my own opinion. I'm going to concur in the opinion. Same thing with Amy Coney Barrett also, right? And then Clarence Thomas is joining Amy Coney. So then they're all kind of agreeing, right? Thomas agrees with Roberts, but he's also saying, well, I got to write my own. And then he writes his own. And then Amy Coney Barrett writes her own. And then Clarence says, that's pretty good too. So he's joining over there. Then Alito filed his opinion, concurring in part and concurring in the judgment. So he says, I agree with some of the concepts from Roberts, but ultimately I definitely agree with the outcome. So the rationale, how he got there might be different, but I agree with the end game. Now, Sotomayor and the libs, right, 6-3. So we got the 6 here kind of in this contorted little pretzel, but all agreeing. And then we've got Sotomayor. She dissents from the left. Jackson Ketanji, who got a $2 million book advance, we covered that this morning, she joined that in full. And Kagan, she joined as to a couple parts of that. And then Kagan filed her own opinion. So I was like, golly. So a lot of stuff happening here, but the ultimate decision, 6-3, Tennessee wins, and the T's suffer a setback. And it's much broader. This is much broader than just a loss for Tennessee. There are a ton of other states that have very similar laws on the book, I think like 20-something, a lot of the red states. And they're making a distinction on this based on medical decisions. This mirrors a lot of what we saw in the Hegseth cases, where he was saying the T's got to get out of the military too. It's not because they're T's or because they have this proclivity or whatever. It's because of medical conditions. If they're in this gender dysphoric state, that means in the military, we can't have the readiness that we need according to medical requirements. Just like anybody else with asthma or a bum knee or a bad back or whatever is going to go through the same limitations and scrutiny, so is somebody with gender dysphoria. And here is the breakdown now that matches a lot of that, coming from Chief Justice Roberts, Supreme Court of the United States, drops the opinion of the court, asking a very important question. In this case, the question is, and what they consider is whether a Tennessee law banning certain medical care for T minors violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment was a big one. After the Civil War, part of the Reconstruction Amendments, we've got a lot of stuff that got shoved in there, including birthright citizenship, equal protection, incorporated down to the states, and more. So here's what Roberts writes for us. Coming from SCOTUS, he says, an estimated 1.6 million Americans over the age of 13 identify as Ts. And that is a big number. Meaning, and I wonder how that number came about. Like, when did it get to 1.6? Like, if you were to graph that on a little chart here, and you had the number on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, what does that number that gets us up to 1,000,006 look like? What is that? And what year was this where we saw this massive up and to the right? Don't know. But it seems like it's probably pretty recent. Now, anyways, saying their gender identity does not align with their biological sex. Some Ts suffer from gender dysphoria, which is a medical condition characterized by persistent, clinically significant distress resulting from an incongruence between their ID and their body. Left untreated, it can result in severe physical and psychological harms. Background. In 1979, the World Professional Association for the Ts, known as the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, published one of the first sets of clinical guidelines for treating this. And it was reprinted in a bunch of things. The standards address two treatments in particular: hormonal reassignment and surgical reassignment. In 1998, another group revised its standards to permit healthcare professionals to issue blockers, right? You take the drugs now, and said that you could even delay the development of physical characteristics on minors in rare circumstances, and that you should maybe do it. Today, the standards discuss a range of factors regarding the provision of treatment to minors. The current standards do recognize known risks associated with the provision of these transition treatments, including adverse effects on fertility, the possibility that the adolescent will later wish to detransition and can't really do that anymore. Now, they further state, writes John Roberts, that there is limited data on the optimal timing of this. So when should you chemically neuter them? When is the appropriate time? I don't know. How about never? In recent years, the number of minors requesting transition treatments has increased, just like we suspected in our little graph. This increase has corresponded with rising debates about the relative risks and the benefits of this. Is it doing anything? Is it stopping them from killing themselves or dying or being attacked or whatever? In the last 3 years, more than 20 states, not playing, have enacted laws banning the provision of transition treatments to minor kids, while 2 have enacted near total bans. Now, meanwhile, health authorities in a number of European countries have also raised significant concerns about the potential harms associated with the blockers to minors. In 2020, Finland came out and found that gender assignment of minors is an experimental practice, experimenting on kids openly in clinics. Like, you call and schedule an appointment. Can you experiment on my child? Sure, happy to. We'll also bill you about 7 figures for it too over the course of their lives. Saying the same year, England and National Institute for Health reports finding that the evidence of using blockers to treat transgender adolescents is of very low certainty, and that there are long-term risks associated with using hormones to treat kids, and saying actually the consequences of this are largely unknown. In 2022, Sweden's National Board of Health and Welfare also found that evidence on treatment efficacy and safety is still insufficient and inconclusive. That's okay. Just keep lopping them off and just keep, chemically castrating all these boys. Saying in 2023, the Norwegian Healthcare Investigation Board concluded that the research-based knowledge for this is insufficient and long-term effects are little known. Well, we're going to know them in a few years. Now, in March 2023, Tennessee had had enough. They joined a growing number of states saying this has gone insane. restricting transition treatments for minors. Many places, they want to do it even without parental consent, start to transition you on the school bus on the way into school. Saying, while the state's legislature acknowledged that discordance between a minor's gender identity and biological sex can cause discomfort and distress, it did identify concerns regarding the use of blockers in particular, saying the legislature found in Tennessee, right, they're close to this issue, they know what's going on. They found that these treatments can lead to the minor becoming irreversibly sterile, having increased risk of disease and illness, and suffering from adverse and sometimes fatal psychological consequences. And you can look at the suicide rates for this group, saying they lack the maturity to fully understand what it means when you castrate their genitals. These consequences may later regret undergoing treatment. Yeah. The legislature was also finding that the treatments were being performed on and administered to minors in the state with rapidly increasing frequency. It's a whole industry. Notwithstanding the fact that the full range of harmful effects is not even known, the legislature also noted that guidelines about these treatments for minors had changed substantially in recent years. Sweden, Finland, UK placed severe restrictions on these treatments after there was no evidence discovered that it actually helps anything. Finally, the legislature determined that there is evidence that gender dysphoria can be resolved by less invasive approaches that are more likely to result in better outcomes. Yeah, but that's not what they want. They want to, irreversibly change the kids because it's part of the recruitment operation. SB 1 responds to these concerns by banning the use of certain medical procedures for treatment of trans minors. In particular, the law prohibits a healthcare provider from surgically removing any tissues or organs on a human being, okay? No chop-a-dick-off-a-me's happening here. Or dispensing any puberty blockers or hormones. Okay, so two things, surgery and puberty blockers, which is wild you have to even, think about that. When you're like 13 or 12, they're going to talk about, anyways. Wild times. And the parents are just, walking them in to do it. Now, how old are they? Anyways. Enabling a minor to identify with or live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex, to change them, or treating this discomfort through those mechanisms. Among other things, the prohibitions are intended to protect minors from physical and emotional harm by having some maniac doctors in there with scalpels. By encouraging minors to appreciate rather than become disdainful of their biological sex. Weird. You just have you talk to them through it, kind of understand what's going on and correct the dysmorphia. SB 1 is limited in two relevant ways. First, SB 1 does not restrict the administration of blockers or hormones if you're over the age of 18. You're an adult, you want to go do all this stuff, do you enjoy? Second, SB 1 does not ban fully the administration of the drugs to minors. In fact, the healthcare provider may administer these blockers to treat a congenital defect, precocious or early puberty, disease or physical injury. Okay, so for other reasons, it's just you can't do it to transition someone's status. Now, the law defines the term to include abnormalities and more. It also contained three primary enforcement mechanisms. Here's what it says. The Tennessee Attorney General can bring an action against anybody in the state who's doing these procedures on the minors and allows discipline for healthcare providers that are a part of it and creates a private right of action that says, well, if you're an injured minor or if you're a non-consenting parent of an injured minor, you can sue for that and get damages. Now, 3 T minors are the ones who brought this lawsuit. John Roberts writing here for the majority of the Supreme Court, saying 3 of the T's came in. Their parents and doctors brought a lawsuit. They said, you can't do this. This is discriminatory. This law is singling out the T's, just like the military was singling out the T's, and we are being denied our due process and constitutional rights. So they moved for an injunction to prevent the ban from going into effect. The United States government intervened and said, well, we're going to step in on this, right? The prior DOJ. Now, the district court partially enjoined enforcement of the prohibitions. So lower level district court said, well, you lack standing, but we still think that they're going to succeed because the T's are a quasi-suspect class. And so they deserve intermediate scrutiny. Now, we talk about 3 levels of analysis, all right? Let's say a government, federal government or state government passes a law. We ask ourselves, how do we measure that law against the constitutionality of our law, of our Constitution and our statutes? So we'll say that there are 3 different kind of hurdles or standards that if the law can survive that, it will be found to be constitutional. And it's harder the higher you go. So let me diagram this out for us. So the lower level district court judge is saying it should be intermediate scrutiny, just like it sounds. It's kind of right in the middle. So we'll call this intermediate scrutiny. The lowest level of scrutiny is called rational basis review. Then we have at the very top what's called strict scrutiny. And so if the government passes a law that impinges on your constitutional rights, let's say it's impeding on your First Amendment rights or your right to a firearm, right? This newly discovered or whatever it is. The law will be analyzed strictly. We'll say, okay, how much does the government need this? Is it necessary to achieve a compelling government end? Is there any other less compelling means that we can do? Like if there's something else we can do, that law is going to fail to regulate that effect. So a very high standard. Now, the rational basis review, which is where this court is going to go for us, is the lowest level standard. Kind of like it sounds, rational basis. If the government's law has a rational basis for existing and it's not impeding on your constitutional rights, then it's fine. As long as it's not harming you or violating any of your rights, they can do it. As long as there's a rational basis for it. And so these are the 2 main buckets we have. And then we have this intermediate scrutiny class. And so what the district judge said is that the T's are going to end up in this class. Now, the T's want to be, also you can say a law, like if the law is attacking a protected class, like if the law was saying, all right, black people can only vote from this time to this time on Fridays, then you said, wow, that's a protected class. Constitution says you can't pass laws to hit a protected class. And so we're going to hold that class to be protected by race. And it's going to have to be strict scrutiny. So, all right, can we say that black people can only vote on Fridays at 11? No. Does that achieve a compelling government interest? No. So that's unconstitutional, right? So that category, race, religion, these are other protected classes that deserve higher levels of strict scrutiny. Now the T's are going to come in and say, we should be up here in this strict scrutiny bucket, but the court's going to have a different interpretation. The lower level court, the district court judge said, well, I don't know where they go. Who knows where they are? They're not really strict scrutinies. They're not really rational basis. Nobody knows. Just kind of like in reality. I don't know what the hell is it. I guess, yeah, great, whatever bathroom you want to use, I guess, right? No one really knows. So kind of caught in this in between here. And the lower level court said, all right, middle level. Now, the Sixth Circuit reversed. Sixth Circuit said the United States and the plaintiffs were unlikely to succeed. It's actually not equal protection. They said the lower level court missed it. This isn't a law about the T's. This is a law about the minors. And therefore, the T's lose. Judges dissented down there, and then we got to the Supreme Court. Here we are. John Roberts for SCOTUS writes, the 14th Amendment and its command that no state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws must coexist with the practical necessity that most legislation classifies for one purpose or another with resulting disadvantage to various groups or persons. So we got to kind of do this analysis because a lot of people are going to say that they're being denied equal protection. So we got to go in, what is the basis of the law? Supreme Court says, we have reconciled the principle of equal protection of the law with the reality of legislation classification. So what bucket do we go into? If the law burdens a fundamental right, or if it targets a suspect class, which are the two categories we just explained. Your right to vote, for example, your right to free speech, for example, or if you are a part of a group that has a special law targeted against you, which we used to have. We will uphold that classification so long as it is rationally related to that legitimate end. So what are you trying to achieve? Is this a law to attack the T's, or is this a law to protect the minors? We generally afford these laws wide latitude under this review, acknowledging that the Constitution presumes that even improvident decisions will eventually be rectified by the democratic process. And this is kind of the principle that we've seen be destroyed over recent months by the other courts. It's this presumption of good faith. You just kind of presume that the government is acting in accordance with the law. And if the people are unhappy about it, they can impeach the president or vote for other Congress people who can impeach the president or whatever. But that has been thrown on its head. Now the courts are acting in the opposite manner. So the court continues explaining, certain legislative classifications, however, prompt heightened review. We go into the strict scrutiny bucket. For example, laws that classify on the basis of race, alienage, or national origin, where you came from, that means we go up to that high bucket, strict scrutiny. And they're going to pass constitutional muster only if they are suitably tailored to serve a compelling state interest. We have also held that sex-based classifications, like women, you'll notice in this strict scrutiny class, right? You don't hear this, like you didn't hear gender in this list of strict scrutiny because it's not in there. So when it comes to gender, it was in this like middle class. And this is why this case I think is pretty important, is because now it's like, do the T's fit into this intermediate scrutiny standard? Saying, while our precedent does not make sex a proscribed classification, we have explained in other cases, kind of carving out this middle category, where sex generally provides no sensible ground for differential treatment. Like how can you treat men and women differently in the law where it works? Saying that sex-based lines are often based around stereotypes, leads to broad generalizations between men and women. And so accordingly, we subject laws that contain sex-based classifications to this middle category called intermediate, right? So certain at the top, gender in the middle, everything else rational basis. Saying that you have to show why you need to be in that category. And for that standard, it goes from necessary, government, compelling and necessary, to a lower standard, which is easier to meet. It just now has to be important. So it's not necessary and compelling. It's just important. If it's important, you can do it. And it's got to be substantially related to the goals. Now, we're now asked to answer this question. Do the T's, and more specifically, does the law, as it is encroaching upon the T's claims, does it actually target them in a way that warrants strict scrutiny? And the Supreme Court comes back down in a ruling, 6-3, says, we hold that it does not. SB 1 does not classify the T's on any basis that warrants heightened review. So it's going to be at that lower standard review, rational basis. T's are not even getting intermediate scrutiny. Let's go through it. On its face, SB 1 is talking about two classifications. One, age, not gender. Healthcare providers may administer certain treatments to people who are over 18, but not to minors. And second, it also talks about the basis of the medical use, writing healthcare providers may administer blockers or hormones to minors to treat certain conditions, but not gender incongruence. And so these classifications are about age. They're about medical use. And so that means they only get rational basis review, the lowest standard of them all, which means this can now be copy and pasted to all of the other states. And the T's can't say, you're discriminating against me because I'm a T. No. It's about ages and medical conditions and use. And so you're not going to be doing that to minors. So it's a powerful and broad ruling, right? This is saying that as long as these laws are not specifically targeting the T's, they're valid. All we do is analyze them according to to rational basis review. Now here, the plaintiffs also argue the T's that SB1 warrants heightened scrutiny. They say we should be up because it's about sex, it's about gender. But neither of the classifications are about sex, says John Roberts. It's not about that. SB1 prohibits healthcare providers from administering blockers to minors, and it does it for medical use. It's nothing about your sex or your gender. They resist this. They say, no, but it's ultimately about it. They say it creates classifications by defining medical care based on their sex. But this argument, they says, is unpersuasive. This court has never suggested that mere reference to sex means you get heightened scrutiny. It's not our case law. Medical treatments and procedures are uniquely bound up in sex. In fact, the FDA itself recognizes that there are biological differences between men and women. Oh my gosh! What? Whoa! Democrats blown out all over the country reading this. You can't say that. We also reject the argument that this turns on sex at all, the law. The plaintiffs and the dissent, with all the libs, they say that an adolescent whose biological sex is female cannot get blockers and present as a male, but a male can present as a female. Don't even know what they're talking about. And it's not even worth trying to parse through it. So conceived, they argue, that it's actually discriminatory. All right. So males to female get certain benefits and females to male don't. All right. So the plaintiffs and the dissent, however, are contorting the meaning of the law. Notably absent from their dissent is a key aspect of any medical treatment the underlying medical concern is intended to address. In fact, the FDA approves drugs and requires they be labeled for specific people. Different drugs can treat the same thing. And for medical treatment, it's about what's being administered. When properly understood from that perspective, SB1 is not being classified on the basis of sex. And it's not incongruent. Under SB1, they can administer blockers for certain conditions that are exceptions to the law, like congenital defects. But this is not a sex-based classification. The law does not prohibit conduct for one sex that it permits for another, like only dudes can do this, but females can't. No minor may be administered. None. Doesn't matter if you're male or female or in between. Doesn't matter. You're not getting treatment for this so-called treatment or being poisoned. Nor are we persuaded that the prohibition on the prescription is enabling somebody to not live in conformance with their gender. Saying such a law would be just like other religious prohibitions that we have rejected. So John Roberts continues going through their arguments, and the next main argument is saying that they're a quasi-suspect class, right? Gender incongruence. We don't really know what the trans are. They're kind of in between strict scrutiny and rational basis. So we'll call them a quasi-suspect class and protect them under that basis. John Roberts says no. Under these circumstances, we decline to find that any of these prohibitions, like on the blockers or hormones, exclude anybody on the basis of their trans status. It's about limitations on minors. And finally, our prior case in Bostock versus Clayton doesn't alter our analysis. There was a prior trans case when everybody's going, what? In that case, that was about somebody who was being fired because of their sex. Now, we reasoned because of that if there's discrimination in the workplace, they've penalized one person for a trait against the other people. And so that was a violation of equal protection, but that is not being extended here. The dissent's reasoning overlooks a key distinction. Under Bostock, an employer who fires a homosexual male for being attracted to men while retaining the employee's straight female colleague has discriminated on the basis of sex because he's penalized the male for a trait, which is attraction to men, that it tolerates for the female employee, right? A difference of treatment between men and women. That's not what's happening in Tennessee. Consider this again. The minor girl with unwanted facial hair inconsistent with her sex. if she has a diagnosis of male pattern hair growth, a healthcare provider may, consistent with the law, prescribe her blockers. But changing her sex to male does not automatically change the operation of SB1. If the hair condition is treated, that would be the same. Unlike the homosexual male employee who was fired, it's different because it's being applied equally to address conditions of the minor. And so SB1 meets the standard of rational basis review. It's a very low standard. They've determined in Tennessee that the hormones and all of this can lead to real big problems for the minors. Tennessee determined by their own legislature that minors lack the maturity to understand any of this. And Tennessee noted that there are less invasive procedures instead of laparoscopies that can help a child who is suffering from this problem. The plaintiffs argue that this doesn't even survive rational basis review. Like, it's so egregious that it can't even survive that low standard. Not true. We decline this invitation to second guess what the legislature has created. They go through and make their analysis, and it seems rational to us. So we're not going to second guess it. Recent developments only underscore the need for this, by the way. After Tennessee enacted SB1, a report came out from England, their National Health Service, characterizing the evidence concerning the use of puberty blockers as remarkably weak, saying there's no good evidence on the long-term outcomes of any of this. In response to the report, NHS in England enacted prohibitions on the administration of puberty blockers outside of 18. Only our country is insane enough to continue it. We cite this report and England's response not for guidance on the ultimate question, but just to show you there are open questions about this. Some of these medical kooks can say that it's cut and dry, that, you know, these kids are going to off themselves or something and prescribe their, you know, little mutilation operations, but that is not settled science. Okay. Now, this case carries with it, says Roberts, the weight of fierce scientific and policy debates about the safety, efficacy, and propriety of medical treatments in an evolving field. The voices in these debates raise sincere concerns. The implications for all are profound. The Equal Protection Clause does not resolve these disagreements, nor does it afford us, the Supreme Court, license to decide them as we see best. Our role is not to judge the wisdom of the law before us. Pfft. Gosh. Yeah, right. Having concluded this doesn't violate the 14th Amendment, this is a policy that should be left to the people, their elected representatives, and the democratic process. And so the judgment is affirmed. The T's are not being treated in this provision under this law as an intermediate suspect, quasi-suspect class at all. It applies to minors. Rational basis review is appropriate. Now, Thomas came out, big fans of Clarence. He said today the court was correct. It is only rational basis review. But I want to address some additional arguments in defense of Tennessee law. He says the Equal Protection Clause includes none of this language that goes into any of the T's or any of the Bostock. He's also shredding the prior case. Extending this framework here would depart even more dramatically in other ways. And this has been rightly rejected, saying the United States came out and asserted that the medical community overwhelmingly agree with our position that you should be able to do this to kids. But there are several problems with this. We should not defer to the expert class, says Thomas. He's right. And second, contrary representations have also been presented, saying there is no medical consensus about how best to treat this. These are irreversible. And fourth, there are good reasons to question the expert class because they're all in on the grift, getting rich off of it and securing political power off the back of the kids. Disgusting. So Clarence Thomas came out. He dropped his decision. And we have a lot here, right? 118 pages in total. So that was a little bit of Clarence Thomas. Let's see what else we got. And man, Clarence just continues on and on. So next we got Barrett. She says, because this court concludes that the bill does not classify on the basis of status, It does not resolve whether the T's are a suspect class. And I write separately to explain why, in my view, it does not. Only a few exceptions to the rule. And the court has said we're not adding additional people to strict scrutiny. And we're not going to do that now. Saying the Sixth Circuit says that the T's are not a suspect class, and it was right to do so. Wow, Amy Coney Barrett coming out hard against the T's. T individuals do not constitute a suspect class, and it was right to do so. To begin, the T's is not marked by the same obvious, immutable, or distinguishing characteristics as race or sex. In particular, it's not defined by a trait that is definitively ascertainable. The plaintiffs here began to experience dysphoria at varying ages, some from a young age, other not until the onset of puberty. Meanwhile, the T's acknowledge that some T's detransition later in life. So it's not immutable. It's not like you were born with a penis or vagina, According to transgender status, does not turn on an immutable characteristic. So those words just come out, sometimes out of nowhere. They kind of just hit you across the face. Anyways, nor is the transgender population a discrete group. Amy Coney Barrett unloading on the T's right now. They're having a meltdown, saying instead, like classes, we have declined to recognize as suspect. The category of T's is large, diverse, and amorphous. That's for sure. The World Professional Association says the term T's can mean whatever. Alito also says the T persons do not qualify as a suspect or quasi-suspect class, so blown out. Though his analysis differs in emphasis, I understand it to be consistent with mine. They are not protected. The APA similarly uses the phrase called the trans youth as an umbrella term to describe basically anything. They got like 57 different, drop downs on their little forms. Finally, holding the T's constitute a suspect class would require courts to oversee all of the policy choices involving the T's. They also agree that T's implicates physical and mental health. Indeed, this case is about the medical treatment of children. The question of how to regulate the medical condition of children is appropriate. Saying, what are the risks for kids? What age is this appropriate? Lots of questions. What about surgeries? Can we chop them off? Expert disagreements. Like if you can just take drugs, why not just have a surgery? Just chop the whole thing off, like as young as possible, right? Like if it's good for them. Why didn't you take pills? Just go do it. Oh, yeah, because people would throw their guts up. Much easier to just shove a pill down someone's gullet. By contrast, the guidelines promulgated say this is a problem. They don't even have the capacity to give informed consent, and so their abusive parents are conducting it on their behalf. Beyond the treatment of dysphoria, T status implicates other areas of legitimate regulatory body, ranging from restrooms to eligibility for teams, sports teams. If the laws that classify based on T status trigger heightened scrutiny, it's going to become the business of the courts to get involved in all of the T lawsuits, because there are going to be about 1 trillion of them. They say that this is discriminatory, but this is mistaken. For the purposes of the 14th Amendment, there's no long-standing pattern of discrimination in the law. Existing suspect classes had a history, right? Everyone else has actually been attacked and discriminated and oppressed, but not the T's. Amy Coney Barrett sending the T's off. I mean, even John Roberts and Clarence Thomas weren't coming this hard, like not even close. I want to clarify, the T's are not a class at all. It was rational basis. We should pass sports laws, all the things. The distinction between de jure discrimination and private animus is very distinct, and that's not happening here. Saying, we have said little about the powerlessness also of new suspect classes. Saying, because the litigants assumed that evidence of private discrimination would work, they didn't thoroughly discuss whether they have suffered a history of de jure discrimination as a class. And so, in future cases, Amy Coney Barrett says, I would not recognize a new suspect class absent a demonstrated injury of actual de jure discrimination. Wow. The Equal Protection Clause does not demand heightened scrutiny of these laws that classify even based on the trans status. So Amy's going even further than Roberts. Roberts is doing this thing where he's splicing it based on kind of the effects of the law. Like the law is very specific. It's about age and medical treatments for minors. Like that's it. It doesn't even talk about the T's. T's can do whatever they want over age of 18, but for minors, it's about medical condition and minors, the age. Amy Coney Barrett is going even further. In other words, you could pass a law that just says, actually, T's are not allowed on women's sports teams. So, bye. And says T's, okay? Laws, Equal Protection Clause does not demand heightened scrutiny of laws that classify based on the T status. Amy Coney Barrett. Rational basis review applies, which means that courts must give legislatures flexibility to make policy in this area. Wow, amazing ruling from Amy Coney Barrett. You know, when she hits, she hits. So Alito came out and he comes back down. I think Amy Coney Barrett gave us the summation of his argument. And then we've got the dissent, which we'll just take a look at the opening paragraph and then leave it there. But here this came out from Sotomayor. She says, any law that treats people differently based on sex is something that warrants heightened scrutiny. And so she's just going to say, well, their T adjustments is sex. And so sex has already been included in Supreme Court precedent. And so since the T's are actually, it is actually a sex category, she's just shoving them in that bucket, not creating a new bucket for them, like in the intermediate class, just saying, no, it's a gender issue, shoving it in there and explaining why. So a lot of it is going to be about how it's horrible, and tragically studies suggest that many attempt suicide. And I think the numbers are also pretty bad after the transitions too. Yeah. Here, suicide in particular is a major concern for parents of teenagers, as the lifetime prevalence of suicide among transgender individuals may be as high as 40%. Yeah, it's pretty shocking. Like, why is that number? Now, the pro-T people would say, well, it's because they haven't transitioned. The people who are concerned about transitioning minors with permanent mutilation of their bodies are concerned about the aftermath of the transition, whether those suicides are happening after the fact or whether it is a deeper problem in the root of the home. For example, if you have a parent who says, actually, we're going to chop your chest off when you're 12 years old. Maybe that's another concern. Anyways, so that's the decision from the Supreme Court of the United States. Pam Bondi was excited about it. She said, I applaud today's Supreme Court decision that allows states to protect vulnerable children from genital mutilation and other so-called gender-affirming care. That leaves children permanently disfigured and scarred. And many on that left party, for some reason, just don't really care all that much about the children. 300,000 that we know of trafficked across our border, not a big deal. You have now clinics getting paid hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars a year to conduct this mutilation of kids, and it's just all in the interest of a completely neutered and exploited society. And the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett says, we're not down with the T's, man. I haven't seen anything from her as aggressive as that in recent memory. No T's as quasi-classes or even suspect classes in any way, shape, or form, says Amy Coney Barrett, and the Supreme Court coming down today with, I think, a well-reasoned decision with a dissent, 6-3. There are going to be screeches about this for some time. We'll keep our eye on all the SCOTUS stuff. Thank you for subscribing and joining as we do. All right, my friends. Now we got one final update on the day, and then it will be time to hear from you. And this is another pretty juicy story here. A little bit of a formatting problem. Much better. Let's get to it. The FBI asked other agencies to delete evidence of 2020 election plots. We've talked a lot about all of the different allegations here, but new evidence is now emerging. You see, Just the News broke this story for us, and Kash Patel has been releasing information to Chuck Grassley, senator from Iowa. And Grassley has sent a number of letters back, including this one, which we'll read through, that is saying that the initial report from the FBI that explained this story, of course, we saw this back in 2020. You see this right before the election. This was released over from U.S. Customs and Border Protection right as the election was coming up. This is now an archived page, but they wrote back then, fraudulent driver's licenses, which are used for criminal activity or fraud, continue to be found by Customs and Border officers at the International Mail Facility in Chicago. Well, that's weird. What are those for? Fake driver's licenses? Since the beginning of the year to June 30th, officers at the IMF have seized 1,500 shipments with fraudulent documents, a total of 20,000 counterfeit driver's licenses. The majority of these shipments were arriving from China and Hong Kong, with other seized shipments arriving from Great Britain and South Korea. Now, the driver's licenses were for various people in different states, with the vast majority destined for neighboring states. Most were for college-age students, and other licenses would share the same picture but have different biographical data. Another concern was the barcode attached to the Michigan licenses. It worked. Huh? These fraudulent identity documents can lead to identity theft, worksite enforcement, critical infrastructure protection, fraud linked to immigration-related crimes like human smuggling and human trafficking. And these documents can be used to be associated with terrorism and to minimize scrutiny from travel screening measures. Now, these counterfeit driver's licenses can also lead to disastrous consequences, said somebody back then. Officers coordinate this. We routinely inspect everything. They don't even talk about registering to vote in this post, or how this could be something that results in fraudulent ballots being collected and voted on throughout the country, which we all were concerned about. And Michigan was one of the most corrupt states of them all because Jocelyn Benson was changing around the rules at the last minute. And so that was about 2020, a long time ago. But now we're getting documents related to that. And once that came on the radar, the FBI asked agencies to destroy evidence of that report, writing a confidential human source told FBI counterintelligence in the summer of 2020 that China was behind all this. They were shipping fake driver's licenses to the United States to manufacture tens of thousands of fraudulent mail-in votes for Joe Biden. That's according to a raw intelligence report that was distributed to federal agencies that Just the News, John Solomon got their hands on over at justthenews.com, saying the report is one of two that was sent on Monday by Kash Patel to the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee called Chuck Grassley. He sent a letter back to Kash asking for clarification. It was sent to U.S. agencies and intelligence agencies on August 24th, 2020, just months before the election, as an uncorroborated advisory, right? Just, hey guys, just FYI, we got a source, says China is rigging the election. Then suddenly, as soon as that letter came out, it hit probably, I don't know, Christopher Wray's inbox. He says, get that retracted immediately. Don't you say the Chinese are doing this. Then suddenly, it was recalled with little explanation, other than that the Bureau wanted to re-interview the source. The recall notice, just like you get in Outlook, this email's being recalled because somebody sent you something they shouldn't have sent you. The recall notice specifically asked spy agencies to erase or delete the original intelligence memo. Delete it from your inbox. You're not allowed to have that. This report was recalled. In order to re-interview the source, recipients should destroy all copies of the original report and remove the original report from all computer holdings, says the retraction. Yeah. Officials told Just the News the recall kept the FBI and other agencies from fully investigating the allegations that Beijing was trying to meddle in the U.S. election, though corroborating evidence came in from a fellow law enforcement agency, Border Patrol. They said 20,000 of them had come in, most from China, in July 2020. Where were they going? Michigan, Wisconsin. The subject line that was won by like 10,000, 15,000 votes, some of these states. I think Michigan was much bigger than that, but Wisconsin was like, 11,000? The subject line of the FBI intelligence bulletin succinctly stated the potential nature of the plot. The document that was sent to all the FBI agents who then said, oh crap, somebody delete that. It said Chinese government production and export of fraudulent U.S. driver's licenses to Chinese sympathizers in the United States in order to create tens of thousands of fraudulent mail-in ballots for U.S. presidential candidate Joe Biden in late August 2020. It goes out. And remember, during all the lawsuits and all of the proceedings, guys like Bill Barr were coming out, no evidence of anything. Not at all. Nothing. Foreign interference and nothing. Yes, there was. FBI sent out a whole memo on it. But you guys are liars and didn't want Trump to win because you tried to steal the country from us, and you did. It says the intelligence report was not deemed to be corroborated, all right, even though we've got two agencies who are reporting on it, making it clear it was raw intelligence and the informant was relatively new and has been corroborated for less than a year. Kind of important year, though. It was also noted the information was indirect through a subsource. They said, warning, this is an information report, not finally evaluated intelligence. No, because they were too busy focusing on other things, like setting Trump up. It also flagged one aspect of the information's allegation. It said that information about fake driver's licenses was gleaned from TikTok accounts of Americans. A person's address information, look at that. Wow. They scraped the data from TikTok to make the fake licenses and ship them back over here? It was unspecified how China would obtain U.S. address data from the application. Obvious, you just have to send them a picture of your license to verify who you are. I mean, I would imagine that's what many other apps do. You want to get verified? Who are you? What's your name? Show me a picture of your ID. Crazy. So they took everybody's info from TikTok, copied and pasted it, printed out new licenses, sent them back to their Chinese apparatus. Then they would go and get a bunch of ballots under these fake names and then vote using our own identities that we gave them on TikTok. Crazy, super smart. Now, that said, the FBI bulletin provided significantly detailed information for agencies to investigate as leads to make sure the U.S. election wasn't being hijacked. Obviously was, openly. Says to exploit a sudden explosion in the mail-in voting during the COVID-19 pandemic. Then they release they drop the COVID virus out of Wuhan. The rest is history. Then they flood the zone with all their fake ballots that we gave them from TikTok. In late August, the Chinese government, and by the way, like you go in there, right? I don't use TikTok on our phone. We're contemplating getting on TikTok because I think Trump's going to extend it again. And, we want to reach people who are on that giant platform now. But the point is that I'm pretty sure, right, I'd want to get a separate phone and keep it like air gap from the rest of my life. But because of this reason, right, and I think it's kind of concerning that when you access a lot of these things, yes, I give you permission to access my photos. Like every photo ever? Yeah, kind of. And it takes over your whole phone and everything gets gleaned over there. But anyways, in late August, the Chinese government had produced a large amount of fraudulent driver's licenses. And all of this would allow tens of thousands of Chinese students and immigrants sympathetic to the CCP to vote for the U.S. presidential candidate. And by the way, we got like 400,000 CCP students over here. Some of them in University of Michigan are bringing in Fusarium germarium and worms. Not good. China had collected private U.S. user data from millions of TikTok accounts. It includes name, ID, and address, which would allow the Chinese government to use real person's info to create fraudulent licenses. The fraudulent licenses were also to include a true ID number and a true address of U.S. citizens, making them difficult to detect. China planned to use the fraudulent driver's licenses to account for tens of thousands of mail-in votes. After Just the News reported on the existence of this, Grassley on Tuesday, we'll look at the letter, implored Cash to investigate the circumstances of the memos more intensively. Who ordered the recall and why? We'll read the letter. Patel told Just the News that he is fully investigating the circumstances around this. Grassley and Patel are happy about it, saying specifically, these allegations of plans from the CCP to manufacture fake driver's licenses and ship them into the U.S. for purposes of facilitating fraudulent mail-in ballots were abruptly recalled, and it was never disclosed to the public. We asked a lot of questions about this. They lied through their teeth to us. Bill Barr knew about this, obviously. Got it in the email. And then recalled it. So pretty disgusting that this was allowed to happen and our government just sat by and did nothing about it. Grassley is now here sending the letter to Cash. He says, all right, Cash. And Grassley, gosh, look at these margins, man. It's like, I'm going to cram as much in here as I possibly can, and you're going to read every word of it. Thank you. Your friend Chuck says, Dear Director Patel, on May 5th, I sent you a letter, among other things, requesting that the FBI produce an Intelligence Information Report, an IIR. And I want the report that came from the Albany field office back then. Now, I write requesting additional records and other information related to that same report. I'm trying to understand the decision-making process of your predecessor's FBI, Christopher Wray. Now, the report notes that it was recalled in order to re-interview the source. It said, recipients should destroy all copies of the original report and remove the original report from all computer holdings. Now, given this, Cash, please provide all records relating to that re-interview and the recall, including but not limited to all communications between and among agents and intelligence analysts. Got some names. Specifically, please provide all emails between and among intelligence analysts called Jordan Seary, supervisory special agent called Charles Keller, and the analyst in charge called Nikki Flores. In addition, please describe all investigative steps the FBI has taken or will take to determine the veracity of the allegations in the IRR. Nothing. As well as who recalled the IRR, Christopher Wray, the basis for the recall, wants Joe to win, and if that basis extends beyond the request for the source to be re-interviewed. Yeah, no, he didn't get re-interviewed. Maybe thrown out, re-interviewed out of a window. Lastly, explain why the FBI under Christopher Wray required the original IRR to be destroyed. Whether this practice is consistent with your current norms and how it comports with federal record preservation requirements. Is Christopher Wray a criminal? Yes. I anticipate, Cash, that your written reply and some responsive documents will be unclassified. I hope so. Please send all unclassified material directly to me. And in keeping with the requirements of any other orders, if it is classified, mark that in an addendum and present it to me. If an intelligence agency owns the information that would be responsive to my request, in the reply, name that agency, and I'll go after them. If you say, I don't have it, CIA has it, I don't have it, Homeland has it, I'll go to them. The FBI has an obligation to perform a complete search and provide full transparency to America. Please respond to this no later than July 1. Chuck Grassley to Cash Patel. We have a totally corrupt FBI that needs to go. I know Cash is in there now, but I mean, this is, I think, beyond repair. If you have the whole agency that gets a memo like that and then everybody just sits on it, we had a whole election. We had litigation, like 50 courts over this. We had interviews with Barr. We had a full J6 investigative committee talking about how Trump had no basis for saying anything about a rigged or stolen election. No basis at all. FBI sent an all-heads memo out to basically the entire agency and then ordered the evidence deleted. And they sat around and said nothing while this was all going on. Nobody from the FBI. So yeah, it's got to go. So here was another letter that Grassley sent out, and I'll just flag this and just show you what's going on, but it's basically the same thing, all right? Grassley also sent this to Cash. He says, FBI, Chris Wray, they were also going after the Catholics. And I was asking for preservation letters. I wanted unbiased sources that was responsible for creating these memos, and they never gave them to me. In fact, Christopher Wray came and gave misleading representations to Congress, lied to us. FBI under Wray consistently failed to provide responses to any of these requests, and their productions on my prior letters confirm the same concerns that I had the first time. In that letter, I asked Wray to reveal the true breadth of what was inside this memo that was targeting the Catholics. It turns out, even before that disclosure, the memo was already widely distributed to the FBI. Likewise, in another email exchange, saying many people relied on the memo that was targeting the Catholics. But the FBI says that they failed to answer some of the questions. Grassley says the FBI did that. FBI under Director Wray obstructed my investigation by not providing these answers for many months. And now Congress needs to know who participated in this obstruction and why the FBI obstructed an inquiry into a memo that it had allegedly repudiated, right? Totally corrupt entity. So 2 letters from Grassley targeting the FBI. We know the FBI was acting as an extension of the Democratic Party for essentially the permanent bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., while they had a demented president who was there asleep at the wheel. Today, we had a hearing about the autopen scandal that was the oligarchical class shoving in a mentally invalid person to act as a president for 4 years. We had a hearing today. Democrats didn't want to show up because they know what they did. Here is a clip from the hearing.
Note that few of my Democratic colleagues are here today. Thank you to Senator Welch from Vermont for being here, leaving us with no other option than to take the boycotting of this hearing as an admission of guilt for their role in this crisis. We must not turn away from the search for answers.
No, we must not. And there were other senators lacing into this issue. Here was Josh Hawley out on the Senate floor today, digging into the Biden autopen scandal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. You know, the visual, sometimes it really is true. A picture speaks louder than words. It's worth 1,000 words. And here, all you have to do is look over at this side of the dais to see that the stone wall continues. I mean, from the party that lied to this nation for 4 years, let's just take a look at some of the things that our colleagues said on the Democrat side when their own Justice Department was concluding that Joe Biden, who, let's not forget, illegally took classified documents and kept them in his garage, in his freezer. I mean, Lord knows where. He just certainly didn't know. Their own Justice Department interviewed the guy and concluded he could not form the requisite mental state to stand trial. He did not have the mental ability to stand trial. And what did our Democrat colleagues say? Vice President Harris says, oh, no, the way that the Hur report characterized the president is so wrong. The president's demeanor is totally fine. Senator Smith, what the Hur said about the president not remembering his son's death, so unfair. Senator Kaine said this is grandstanding. Senator Fetterman said it's just cheap shots. You had other senators saying, Senator Ossoff in February of 2024, saying, and I quote, I found the president to be sharp, focused, impressive, formidable, and effective. In June 2024, Congressman Jeffries insists Biden was, and I'm quoting again, incredibly strong, forceful, and decisive. Where are they now? They don't want to answer for any of those quotes now. They lied to us for 4 years, and we know they lied. They know they lied. It's why they're not here. They don't want to answer a single question. They can't bear to show their faces in public. And you know what? It's right that they can't do that because the bill of goods they sold this country, they walked this country right into one of the greatest constitutional crises of our history, And now they are afraid to even show up to admit it. These are people, and this is a party that cannot be trusted with power.
Nope.
That cannot be trusted to tell the truth, the most basic truth. They all changed their tunes after Joe Biden debated President Trump, and the whole world could see he couldn't even form a sentence.
Right.
That running this guy for president again is a form of elder abuse. My, how they changed their tunes after that. Now they can't even show up in public to talk about it. This is embarrassing. But worse than that, it's dangerous. It is dangerous for this country. Mr. Wold, I want to pick up on something you just said a second ago about the OLC and their opinion as to when an autopen can be used. Just be clear about this. Autopen means not signed by the person. Autopen is basically push of a button and it gets signed. OLC says only when the president specifically directs it and it is under his direct authority. Do I basically have that right?
That's correct, Senator.
So based on the facts we know, did that happen in this case with all of the pardons and clemencies and other giveaways that Joe Biden signed?
Assuming that the Biden White House complied with sort of traditional practice of presidential administrations and that there was record keeping either from the staff secretary or others, there should be records to indicate either through covering memorandum or briefing books where the president would have signed his signature authorizing this decision. None of that has come forward. That would be very easy to dispel some of these concerns. And I think what we're seeing here is really the autopen is best understood as sort of a tool of executive convenience.
Hold on a second. I just want you just said something very important. I want to emphasize that. So what you're saying is that there should be, for every time that Biden authorized the autopen, there should be a record of that. And he should have had to have registered his personal consent to using the autopen. Is that basically correct?
I think to put it another way, I would say in the policy paper flow to the Oval Office, there should be a record of what documents are presented to the president when he gave his assent to the actions that are listed in those documents, whether it's a judicial nomination or it's a statutory response to Congress.
Well, I think the answer is we need to get those documents. And I just say to our friends in the media over here, you guys need to be asking for those documents, and we need to be asking for them, Mr. Chairman. We need to see those documents. And the president, the former president now, can certainly choose to release them. I'm sure they're part of his personal papers, right, Mr. Wold?
And that's correct. And the first place to start would be the staff secretary's office under President Biden.
Oh, so here's the trail. If you want to know, if you want an answer to the question, did Joe Biden actually assent to the use of the autopen and you think of all the people he pardoned, he granted clemency to, murderers, drug dealers, child rapists.
Hunty?
Let's find out, did he actually authorize it? There should be a record of it, is what we've learned today. Thank you for that testimony, Mr. Wold. There should be a record of it. So this is a binary question. It's not, oh, we don't know, gee, it's hard to say. No, actually, we can find out. So right now, today, I call on President Biden, former President Biden and his staff, release the documents. You have them. You know you have them. Release them.
They would be incriminating themselves. Like, oh, crap, we don't have any of that.
It's legal. And if you're really not embarrassed about it and you think it was totally constitutional, release the paper flow. Show us the documents where the president authorized the use of the pen for every single pardon and clemency and stay application. Let's see it. Let's see all of it.
Yeah, we appreciate the statement. We definitely want to see it. Biden and his people should release it, but it's just kind of an empty demand because they're not going to do that because it would be damning to their case. And so we got Holly, who also is on a pretty powerful committee. You know, the Senate, since the Republicans are in charge of that, they could probably form some sort of like a select committee or something and issue subpoenas over to certain people. And if they don't show up and respond to those subpoenas, then you could hold hearings, and then you get somebody who looks like Liz Cheney to come out. We don't really have anybody who looks like that, but you get the point. And come out and make them show up. And if not, then you just charge them, just like they did to Bannon and Navarro. So Congress has a lot of power. We appreciate the demand that Biden send it out, but what we saw there reminds me of chain of custody in a criminal case, right? The example we use a lot is a DUI case. If you get pulled over for a DUI and they draw your blood, let's say a cop takes you down, they're doing a big saturation patrol, they got a DUI processing center at the corner of Rural and Southern, and they're down there doing an East Valley task force, and they're just going crazy, rounding everybody up. They bring you back down to the station. You've got one officer who draws your blood. You have another officer who transports the blood into the crime lab, and then somebody who's a crime lab technician will put it into evidence for the night. Then somebody else will come take that out the next day and then analyze the blood. And every time this happens, right, every single transition, when it comes out of your arm to the cop who put it into cop B, into his car, who put it in evidence, which is C. Somebody took it out of C, gives it to D. D does the analysis on the sample. That's E. That's a chain of custody. And if you screw that up, if that transportation officer is not in that chain, I don't know what happened to him. He's gets, charged for something with children or something. What? He's not in that chain. Now a defense attorney has a real good argument, and judges will say that everything that comes after that broken chain cannot be reliable anymore. We don't know what the heck happened between the time it came from this location to this guy, or if let's say the guy who drew the blood, the venipuncturist, draws the blood and he's not available to come in and testify about how the draw was done and all the things, the chain is broken. You might, in a criminal case, have that entire blood sample thrown out, no longer used against you. So unless they've got an intoxilizer or other evidence, even from the field sobriety test, if they want to go on those, you're basically off, okay? Now, if that happens in a presidential pardon or legislation that goes into effect at the national level, and we don't have a valid chain of custody for that, why should we have to be saddled with bad law that we can't even validate to the original source power? You wouldn't allow that in a criminal case. Is national law not as important as a high standard as a regular DUI case? For crying out loud. So that's a good question that we'll keep our eye on, but hopefully Josh Hawley, does something about it. Now, someone else is John Kennedy. And he said if the President Biden can't even finish his sentence without taking a nap and talks like he's from outer space, at what point do you have a moral obligation to stand up and say he can't do his job anymore? Come on here. I like this look from Kennedy. Can you believe this? Here's what he said.
You have all been staffers. You've worked in government. You've had a boss. In Mr. Spicer's case, his boss was the President of the United States. Let's suppose the President, you were using your experience as a staffer. You were working for the President, any President, hypothetically a President. And let's suppose the President started talking like he was from outer space. Let's suppose the President became fatigued very easily.
All is true.
He couldn't finish a sentence without taking a nap. Let's suppose the President, he was just physically in bad shape. Mentally and physically. Mentally, he may or may not have, you're not a doctor, neurodegenerative disease, but physically you can see you could bake a Thanksgiving turkey in the time it takes him to walk across the stage.
It's true.
What is,
Hours.
do you think, as a member of his staff, what do you think is your moral obligation? To say, wait a minute, the President can't do the job anymore. I know you're loyal folks. You believe in your president, this president, whichever president. I'm speaking hypothetically. You're loyal. You want to be a good staffer, but you also have a moral obligation. How do you reach that decision, Professor? And I'll go to each of you.
Senator, I think the first thing you would have to do in a situation like that is exercise your own judgment. How serious is this problem? Because everybody has moments when
Pretty
they lose
serious.
focus. It happens.
He was the president.
But if somebody thinks this is a really serious problem, I think the first thing to do is the most difficult, which is to say to the president, because the 25th Amendment also provides that the president can say, I'm unable to exercise the powers and duties of my office.
And suppose the president
That would be extremely
says,
difficult, but I think it should be
look,
done.
trust me, I can. And it's clear to you that he has neurodegenerative disease and he can't. What do? Do you have a moral obligation as a staff member to go to the American people and say, we've got a problem here, it may cost me my career?
Senator, I think at that point you have an obligation to talk to the Vice President, who is in charge of the Section 4 process under the 25th Amendment.
What about you, Mr. Wald? You have a moral obligation. I understand you want it to go away, you want to work it out with him, but you can't. When does a staffer have a moral obligation to stand up and say he can't be president anymore, or she can't be?
Well, Senator, the 25th Amendment only works if individual staffers or officers of the United States exercise that kind of moral judgment.
That's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, so, I think always, as the professor said, the presidency is an enormous burden, so it would be not one instance, it would have to be several instances of a failure to exercise judgment.
How do you make that decision? You're the staffer, I get it.
Yeah, well, I think it begins with prayer, of course, but after that, I think it's conversation with other staffers, and if you're unable to confront the president or to raise the issue with the vice president, you should resign.
What about you, Mr. Spicer? Do you stand up and do it and tell the truth and run, or do you have a greater obligation to your boss?
Well, luckily I didn't have that problem. But I would say that you have a moral obligation as an American, as a citizen, as a human being. If the leader of the free world cannot conduct themselves to make the decisions that are critical to this country and to the world, you absolutely have a moral obligation to follow the chain of command. And if they don't act, then you must.
But Joe Biden was serving their interests. They had somebody who was working that autopen, baby, getting Democrat grift after Democrat grift approved. This morning on the members only stream, we talked about the $800 million grift that was transferred over to a prior convicted felon who was convicted of bribery. He got another $800 million or $500 million, took a plea deal, and it was all connected to USAID government money to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And they were all in on that. They were getting fat off America. Now the American people have seen what they've done, and we're reversing course. And so I'm very hopeful that we get these documents. I think that there's a lot to this here. We watched it all happen in real time and covered and chronicled a lot of the lawsuits and 2020 election litigation here. And now that we have control of the agencies that were responsible for the cover-up of everything that happened, the rigging, the COVID, the fake ballots, the changed election rules, it was a full-on onslaught, total complicity with the media. Then they engineered January 6th to be the mop-up operation to try to impeach Trump and take him out permanently and forget about the entire rigged election. The whole thing was an operation. Sounds like it was run by China. Joe Biden sounds like he's a Chinese asset, currently in connection with Hunter Biden, who also got a lot of money over there from China and diamond rings and other things. So we'll keep our eye on this. Hopefully Holly and the rest of the senators, form a committee or something other than just demanding a release of the documents. Go get them. All right, my friends, what a beautiful day it has been. If you're just joining us, quick recap on what we talked about. Quick update on the Tucker versus Ted Cruz situation. Ted Cruz allegedly fighting on behalf of the Jews, and according to Laura Loomer, Tucker on behalf of the Muslims. But we see this is just, we think, a nice, healthy conversation that's happening on the right, and we're happy to have these two heavyweights duke it out. Neil Patel, though, came out and said Tucker's not taking any money from Qatar. All right, so lay off that. We also saw that there was a report from Posobiec saying that Luminate Advisors also says they didn't pay Tucker anything for that. It was their consultancy fee that they paid, and they filed a fire report on it. So the battle continues. Ultimately, Trump says we're about America first, and we're going to be continuing to be America first. And so a little bit of coverage on that. Then we went to the Supreme Court. The trans absolutely obliterated today by the Supreme Court. And the big person who is the standout of the whole decision is Amy Coney Barrett, that says it's not even, I don't even care, right? Roberts kind of sidestepped all this and said, well, the law is facially neutral. And so since it's only age and minors in certain conditions, it's completely valid under rational basis review. Amy Coney Barrett went one step further and said, guess what? The T's are not even if this law was against the T's, they still are not a suspect class. And then lastly, we saw Chuck Grassley's letter over to Kash Patel. Kash Patel released information about the FBI literally recalling and deleting evidence that the Chinese were printing and sending in tens of thousands of ballots to their tens of thousands of people, millions maybe of people who are here, who are Chinese adjacent or CCP adjacent, and presumably making or having them vote for Joe. Might explain all of those late night ballot drops that came in on those printed ballots. Who knows? But hopefully we get to the bottom of it. So it's been a great stream, my friends, and we really appreciate you being here. Thanks for subscribing if you haven't already done so. Thanks for sharing the show with a friend or family member, because as always, it's better when we do it together. Of course, we'll be back here tomorrow to get into it again, but I also want to say thank you for supporting our work. Thank you for sending in these donos, these super chats. Welcome to our new membos who joined us. We had a great members only stream this morning, And we're going to stick around for an after party. So if you're a membo, stick around and come hang out. YouTube and locals will hit a refresh and we'll debrief, see what you had to say about the show, and see what else is going on. So today, it's Hump Day. Happy Wednesday, my friends. It's Hump Day, all downhill from here. Thank you to Donut and John for clipping for us this afternoon. We got Thomas Keeler. Welcome, Thomas. Thanks for becoming a supporter. Grab the stream from this morning. We did a lot more Tucker stuff this morning, a lot more Iran stuff this morning, and it was a good one. We got Thomas, thank you for that. Off-Label Podcast says, next week is going to be busy for us. Multiple hearings and not enough time to show them all. Oversight is set to run a multiple day one now. Is that Comer's hearing? Man, Off-Label Podcast. Make sure you're subscribed over to them. They are right next door on the tubes and on the rumbles. And that's good. We like busy weeks. Hey, Knox is here. Happy Wednesday, all. Says, hey, happy Wednesday, Knox. Knox is a defense attorney in Texas. Says, Cruz got almost $2 million in the very close Senate race from AIPAC. AIPAC from Cruz, Ted, Texas, $1.87 million from AIPAC. Yeah. And that, of course, doesn't have to be reported to FARA like the Qatar money, because AIPAC is American Israeli Political Action Committee, and they're a domestic organization. Convenient. Doan says, I'm no Tucker hater, but I'm skeptical of Dove's on Iran. His interview with Robert Amsterdam on Z's shutdown of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is a must-see. His interview with Robert Amsterdam. I don't think I've seen that. Yeah, Tucker talks a lot about that, about Christians and about how all this global stuff is going to impact the Christians. I've heard him talk about that even in relation to World War II and the bombings in Japan. Yeah, it's interesting. And I think it's worthy of a conversation. I think that it's not appropriate for the automatic default to be sort of a label towards the other person, whether it's anti-Semitic or whether it's like, AIPAC bought and paid for or something like that. I think these are both pretty reasonable dudes. I appreciate both of their takes on it, and I'm happy to see it be duked out. And I'm happy to see Tucker ask some hard questions about stuff like that a lot of people have that are kind of hard to ask, hard to talk about, because you do get labeled certain, in a certain way, and it's not true at all. So it's kind of a hard thing to talk about. And I think Tucker actually had a lot of courage in asking those questions, and Ted Cruz had a lot of courage in sitting there and responding to it, keeping his cool. And I thought it was a positive thing. Thank you, Doan, for that. Thank you, Knox. What's up? Mock Schnell says, grr, got stuck at work this morning, not getting out of town till tonight. Mock Schnell, I saw you're here. I'm like, what are you doing, man? Do you have Starlink out there in the woods? But you haven't gone yet. So figured a few more membos to make myself feel better. Mock Schnell, man, it makes us feel better too. I'm glad it's mutual. Thank you, Mock Schnell. Check this out. 50 new membos before Mock Schnell ventures off into the wilderness for a few days. We got Doris Nogueras. We got Linda Robertson. What's up, Melissa Morgan? Will H. M.E. Pete is here. Candace Alexander. What's up, Sherry? Not your average golden potato joined us. We got Cindy C. TJ. What's up, Prince Vibes? Tabitha Britton. Kay Baxin is here. Love all. Steve Bear's dad is here. Carrie Anthony. We got Brian Lucas. George Siegel. What's up, the Sues? We have G. Yikes Eng. Bushmaster. Mike Chaput. Lori is here. Fun Size. What's up, Chief Librarian Mayonnaise? Ortiz is here. G. Usury. Teresa Bennett. Paul Verhel. What's up, Jar Jar Binkset? What's her name? Sonic Garage Guitars. Alan the Magic Goose. Loopsy. Brian Peterson. What's up, Apocalypse Dan? New Air Industries. Mark Forno. What's up, Nina Shaw? James Kelly. Gina. Magic Wiz. Eric Sandel. Diana S. Super Goober is here. Craig Simpson. What's up, C. Fetzer? D. Thompson. Rochelle Nelson. And 20 more from Mock Schnell. Welcoming in Cecilia Aguirre. What's up, Jeff Jones? Israelite Plight. We got Reclining Gamer. Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. Signed Deb. What's up, Lawrence Penn? Dog Mama. Terry Sherwood, Lucky Tiger, Scott Mouse, Box Van D, Blue Manchu, Gut Shank. We got Brian BKKs, James Bond is here, BJ Bumblebee, Greenacre, Ken Burrows, Daughter Shar, and all gifted courtesy of Mock Schnell in the house. Mock Schnell, thanks for doing that. You're amazing. We appreciate 70 new Membo friends. That means if you're a new Membo, stick around on the members only after party because we're going to be back very shortly to debrief on the show. What's up? Doan is here. Says keeping parents out of the T loop is dead wrong from Doan. Yeah. And I think California was talking about like bills like that. Like if your child wants to identify at school differently, they'll enable it. Parents be damned. Liberum, what's up? How would you, maybe it's the HWY. Hey, the separation of powers never applies, says Liberum. I guess it depends on who you ask. I mean, I think that many Democrats would say there is no real separation of powers. If you want to create an independent body to do whatever you want, you're allowed to do that. It doesn't have to exist under any branch. It's constitutionally illiterate, but it's true. Doan, leftism's base narrative is to attack innocence. That's interesting frame on that. Attack innocence. Yeah, that sounds like there's probably some very subliminal, problematic psychological problems if that is the base. Thank you, Doan. Peaches, why even have protective classes? Doesn't that create more separation instead of just making it illegal to treat anyone as not equal? I think, Peaches, it's definitely something that's not like overly broad. There's been a couple categories in our history where there's been some laws that have been passed to target certain people. You know, Irish, Catholics, Jews, blacks, whatever, all throughout our history. And so in the precedent, we've said, well, you know, the Constitution has some base protections in it. And since these laws are starting to be bundled up into these categories, we're going to protect those broad categories like race, religion, alienage in particular, right? We don't want all the Irish coming over and taking, you know, the jobs or whatever. So they've kind of developed naturally. But what you're seeing is the court refusing to extend it, right? So in other words, they're not the T's are not getting lumped into there, according to Amy Coney Barrett. So the law, I think it's probably just for, you know, clarity in the law so that you can understand how to deal with cases. Like the court set these frameworks up so that when lower courts are working, they can say, well, actually, that is a targeting race. So clearly bad, it's gone, right? So I think it might just be a practical thing in addition to just a logical extension of the Constitution that certain categories are protected. But the downside risk, I think, is something you're articulating very well, is that once you start, you know, once it extends over to the T's, then you got the L's, the B's, the T's, plus the expialidocious people, the two spirits, the three L's, two L's, whatever it is, all get included in this. And Amy Coney Barrett is saying, no, T's, you're not a woman. You're not a dude. It's not a sex problem. You don't have immutable characteristics like the other genders do. So you're not intermediate scrutiny worthy. Yeah. So not extending it, right? Limiting it. King of Biltong. Look at this. Free shipping if you have an order that's over $54.95. So go load up over there. Get free shipping. And use code Robert. 10% off over at BiltongUSA.com. Thank you, King of Biltong, for the dono today. Tyler, Karen Reed has been found not guilty on all charges. I saw that headline. We didn't talk about that case at all, but dang, that was a good one. Says, except a lesser included OUI charge. She did not kill John O'Keefe, as was obvious. So who did it? I don't know much about the case, but I think they're saying other cops did, right? That she was set up by other cops. Crazy. Yeah, and sounds like, you know, anytime you get a not guilty in a criminal prosecution, it's like, whoa, wasn't expecting that because the default is convictions. Yeah, interesting. John says, Karen Reed is absolutely guilty. I don't know anything about it. So interesting, right? It's kind of a split take on that. Chat with me. How do you feel this ruling will change the national conversation of trans? Well, I think people are already getting pretty tired of it, honestly. Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I think the momentum is already recoiling to that. People are realizing, wait, that group is at the expense of women. That's weird. Oh, and they're targeting children. Oh, and they're very aggressive and saying that Supreme Court justices should be eliminated and all sorts of stuff. It's like, you know, too much testosterone or something. But the point is, I'm not sure that it will go much further in the public momentum. I think that's not true. I think that it actually will help add to the momentum. When you have Amy Coney Barrett coming out as aggressive as she was in that, saying, don't even like come back and ask me about this. I'm not waffling. The T's are not an intermediate class, so get out. It's like, all right. So you write her off. You throw in everybody else basically. It's like Supreme Court is not down for it and is not going to be changing for that. Yeah. Anyways, Wes Downer says, Rob, please look up the WPATH files leak. There is no clinical evidence that transitioning leads to better mental health or lowers the suicide rate. Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah, that makes just natural sense to me. Like, I don't even need to see a study for that. Like, you're telling me that giving kids and their bodies chemical neutering substances, chemical poisons that are going to manipulate their entire natural function is going to be better for them? Are you crazy? Are you crazy? Off-label podcast. Remember the HAV data earlier this year? EO 14019 that gives the government the ability to deregister you to vote. This ID story is a direct connection to it. The TikTok thing is wild. They were stripping IDs off of the entire database to create fake IDs and vote. Stacy Milliken says kids deserve love, not life-altering decisions they can't undo. Let them grow before leading them down a permanent path and removing their genitals. I agree with you, Stacy. I view it, I think it's probably a little politically incorrect, but I don't really care because I think it's 100% true, is that it's just, the younger you can recruit or transition, the more likely it is you're going to have a lifetime ally, right, is what it is. It's not as much about having a child come out and express who they are as it is recruiting a new, because they're not having kids, or unless they're adopting other, kids. So it's about multiplying, right? You got to really aggressively recruit people onto your team. Younger you can get them, the better. Yeah. Small Cherokee girl, Rob, does this mean they cannot chemically castrate kids also? I hope they cannot do this anymore. Yeah, that's exactly right. So no hormone blockers, no pharmaceuticals that are going to be there to transition themselves into another gender. From Small Cherokee girl. Mr. Magic Man, yeah, that's the order, says, Mr. Magic Man, 51 intelligence sources claim that fake Chinese IDs sent to the U.S. from China, it had all the earmarks of a Russian operation. Mr. Magic Man, is that you, John Brennan? All the hallmarks. It came from Beijing, which is close to Moscow. So, it's over there in the same region. So basically the same thing. Hilarious, Mr. Magic Man. Doan is here. What's up, Doan? Hey, that's Obama's bureau, right? Joe's just a patsy. He was just an empty shell vessel of a human who they exploited. I think that's probably true, Doan. Hey, Stacy Milliken, don't hate me. There are an awful lot of Republicans who will speak a lot of words and follow up with zero actions, kind of getting tired of it. It's like, I know. Josh Hawley, sounds great. What are you asking for? Like, if you strip it all down, you're asking for Joe Biden to release the documents? Okay. Do you want him to also incriminate Hunter too in jail? And is that you're expecting that to happen? It's not going to happen. So the next best option is you actually have to do something, which is form a committee or send subpoenas or whatever. Data, what's up, Data 12? Over on Rumble. Thank you, Data 12, for gifting 10 membos over on the Rumbles. What an amazing thing. Thank you, Data 12, for doing this. Welcome. Hawkeye, Winnowing, Nor Queen, Nick Danger. What's up, Aaron Richard? Rangers in the house. We got Country MC, Dog Digger, Doofaloopagus is here, and DeWitt. What's up, DeWitt in the house? Great to see you. Data 12, thanks for gifting membos over on the Rumbles. We really appreciate that. And thanks for watching on Rumbles, friends. We got this. Dark Rogue says, I love the 5 guys behind Senator Kennedy looking like the Centurions in the Life of Brian movie, not trying to laugh over the name Biggest Dickus. Hilarious. From Dark Rogue. Yes, everybody gets on like pins and needles when Kennedy's about to drop something because you never know when he's going to drop just a banger out there. It'd be fun to be a staffer for Kennedy. It's like, all right, you just like make bets. All right, here comes one. All right, got one. Knox is here. Out of all the stupid fads and trends I have seen come and go in my life, the fading of this trans thing might make me the happiest. And remember, my aunt was trans, from Knox. Yeah. And what's thought? Well, I think you shared another. Here it is. Says Aunt Christine would have found modern trans gauche and hopelessly garish. All right, so this is Knox's aunt, who's apparently trans, and I don't know which one is your aunt, but I think it's Aunt Christine. So maybe this person right here. But all right, so that looks like an older photo from a different era. I don't know if she would be in favor of lapidectomies for children or not, but thank you for that, Knox. I agree with you. I think it's kind of a fad like Pogs or something. And and I think there's a social contagion to this as well. And there's a suicidal contagion to this too. Okay, what happened to these numbers? All the kids start, I might be trans, I might be genderqueer, I might have 35 pronouns, I'm fluid, I'm dynamic, I'm this, I'm that, whatever. And it was instigated and indoctrinated into their brains. Don't know if your aunt would support that. Sounds like no. Tyler says, the Karen Reed case reminds me of the roots of this channel. Bad popo. I know. We stopped doing a lot of those because we started to get dings on YouTube. Funny that you mentioned chain of custody and how an unbiased judge would throw bad evidence. Cough, cough, Judge Bev. Which one was Judge Bev? Was that from Karen Reed? So that didn't happen with Karen Reed? Yeah, the bad popo stuff is fun. And we had some pretty, I guess, aggressive body cams and stuff. We started getting in trouble with YouTube, but it's good stuff. So shout out to everyone who covered that over at Karen Reed, man. That was a long haul for everybody covering that. Stacy Milliken, what's up? Hey, Stacy, I follow a lot of YouTube channels. I only pay for yours. Stacy, thank you for that. We really appreciate that. We try to deliver for our members. We do member streams in the mornings. We do Saturday streams. Oh, it's gauche. Oh, is that what it means? Gauche? All right, I don't know what that means. That's a fancy word. I don't know what that means. Gauche? Never said that word in my life other than today. All right, I guess that's true. All right. So, Knox, thank you for that. Super gauche and hopelessly garish. All right, so there's the words. All right, so my friends, thank you for sending in those amazing donos. You're very much appreciated. Thank you for making what we do here together possible. Thanks for watching the show. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for inviting people you know or love to come over here. You can even tell them I made you do it. And really, thank you for the donos. Thanks for becoming membos. We are sticking around for our members only after party. So if you got gifted a membo, courtesy of Mock Schnell, if you decided to join up and become a membo on YouTube, hang tight. As soon as the show ends, go back to the channel homepage, hit refresh. There'll be a members only video, and I'll drop a link in the chat. Locals, friends, just stick around because we'll just pause for a brief moment. We'll come back and we'll see what you have to say about the show and what else is cooking out there. So we're going to come back in a few seconds for the members only after party. But before we wrap it up on the day, we want to thank our amazing mods and meme smiths who mod the fort down for us, our friends John McGarvey and Donut clipping for us today. We also want to say thank you to 51K, Carrie B this morning, and K Bean clipping for us this morning. I had to think about what we were doing this morning. We also want to thank Gigum and Neuro D, Janek, Dog Digger over on the Rumbles. Thanks to Elliot and Gigum for our meme smiths, and all of the amazing people who help make this show work and come together. And thank you for being here and supporting us. My friends, that is going to be it for us on the day. We're going over to Watching the Watchers and our members only after party. We'd love to see you there. But if not, we are coming back tomorrow. And when we do come back, we are going to need to see you right back here so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Make it a beautiful night, my friends. Happy Wednesday. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching, my beautiful friends. Now it's that time where the stream must end. We brought the heat with every chat and line. Together we expose corruption. One more time we dove in the truth where the media hides. Lit up the lies with receipts on all sides. The fight isn't over, but we made them sweat. We ain't done yet, no, not just yet. Because together we are watching the watchers, truth on our side. Watching the watchers, we won't be denied. Watching the watchers, eyes open wide. Fighting for freedom with nothing to hide. Drop a like and don't forget to share. And bring a friend who's ready to care. Tomorrow's lies are just today's news, but here we see through the scripted ruse. Together we are watching the watchers, shining the light. Watching the watchers, defending what's right. Watching the watchers, stay each night together in